So thank you everyone for coming. It's one of the roundtables or the conversations when one could easily start it with not a warm welcome but a hot welcome to all of you, brave enough to come here today with, I guess, around 35 degrees. So thank you very much. As announced in the Festival Grounded program, we will talk about peace as written by decision makers, recorded by the media, and lived by the people. And we will talk with two very experienced journalists with many years of invaluable experience under their belt, reporting from war zones and beyond. They know firsthand about living and working in times of war, talking to people experiencing peace in times of armed conflict, and they know what kind of peace do peace agreements bring with. So it will also be interesting to hear your thoughts on peace in the light of the climate change, on current conflict in Ukraine, the one in Sudan and Niger, and the sponsors of peace and war there for it. What, if anything, can an ordinary citizen, a journalist, do to break this chain of violence? And of course, I would be interested to hear your thoughts on usually how well or not so does the media do their job, and with social media in the equation, what does it mean? So Barbara Šurk and Aida Čerkez, thank you very much for being with us. A very hard question to start with. It will be a difficult topic, but how are you coping with 35 plus, Barbara? Your recipe? Your recipe?
Ooh, cold towels at night and lots of other, cold showers in this one, because there is, as long as there is cold water coming out of the pipe, it's not hot enough.
Aida?
Huh? I'm melting. I don't know. I don't have a recipe. Just enduring it, hoping it'll pass.
So Barbara Šurk spent 15 years in the Middle East, where she was based in Jerusalem. She was a correspondent for Delo Daily, and later from 2016 for the Associated Press. She was reporting for AP from Middle East, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. She has covered the US invasion of Iraq, Israeli occupation and the Palestinian Intifada, the civil war in Syria, and the emergence of ISIS. Since returning from the Middle East, she has reported from the Balkans for the New York Times, and she was also editor for Politico. Quite a long CV.
I'm old.
And Aida Čerkez, she worked as a journalist and Associated Press bureau chief in Sarajevo for 24 years. She spent 4 years enduring constant bombing and sniper fire directed at the Bosnian capital and people there. And her experience was the basis for the 2018 film, What's This Country Called Now? In 2017, she became an editor at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, an investigative network, and she has been working with the Center for Investigative Journalism since its inception and has been a member of its assembly since 2005. Aida, maybe I will start with you. A year and a half ago, the war in Ukraine started. Following what is happening there and around this conflict, and trying to, reach or not so some kind of an agreement, peace agreement, what comparisons, differences can you draw with what you experienced as a journalist in Bosnia, in Sarajevo? Are there any? I know of your letter to the Ukrainians, but what comes to mind?
what comes to mind first is that a year and a half ago, I was watching the Ukrainians being as clueless and stupid as I was before, because you just don't want to believe that this can happen to you. You know, it always, you kind of switch the channels and there's a war here and there's a war there, but somehow you feel that you're excluded from all of this trouble and that this just happens to other people. Wow. In 1990, you know, when Yugoslavia was falling apart, I always tell this story. The war started actually in Slovenia, and that was our first shock. It lasted just for a few days, but it was really a shock. Like, really? Tanks on the street? Seriously? And I remember my mother watching the news and crying and said, "Oh, this is terrible. How can this happen in Yugoslavia?" Oh. And she would wonder about it and then say, always in the end say, "Thank God it's not here." Then the war moved to Croatia. She equally cried and, you know, was shocked and always the last sentence was, "Thank God it's not here." Then it crossed over into Bosnia. It came to Bijeljina, Foča, but not Sarajevo. The same, you know, "Thank God it's not here." Then a cousin called from the other end of town, Ilija, which is like 10 kilometers from us. And Gordana was on the phone, and she was kind of, they're shelling us, and there are bombs falling on my mom. She hung up and said, "Thank God it's not here." A few days later, we were standing in the kitchen. I was holding the baby. She was frying something. You just continue to live your life as, you know, as everything would be normal. And a shell landed on the roof of the building across the street, and we just froze. And the only thing my mother said, "Thank God it's not here." And that's the we're under attack. It's dobro.
You want to say thank God it wasn't
Thank
here?
God it's not here. So that was the first.
I'm fine. It's okay.
So that was the first similarity, the disbelief that I saw among Ukrainians. Ever be an attack, although the Russian forces were already surrounding their border. Well, what do you think they're doing there? And then when it started, it had so many, the pictures, it had so many similarities, and I concluded that it's the same pictures that I'm seeing now, just better resolution. That's the only difference. And there is a quite significant difference, though, social media. When we were covering the war in Bosnia, we were the only source of information. You have professionals, they're not easily fooled. You know, you can't just fool wolves like that. Most of the people that were covering the war in Bosnia, I would kind of ask them, "Have you ever been in?" "Oh, it's my 11th war, it's my 7th war." So people with experience would report from the conflict. It was quite credible. Now what you have is social media. Everybody can make, you know, any video you can. What reporters are actually doing, they're running after stuff that has already been published somewhere on Facebook to verify. And that's a very, very significant difference, and I think it's a very, very dangerous development, that you don't get the news from professionals.
Barbara, your thoughts on what she just said? You're a professional journalist.
Yeah, I just want to add, because if I continue with the war in Ukraine, what were my thoughts when the war in Ukraine has started, and how it was, I was watching it from from France, where I was working for the AP, covering all the Brussels so meetings of the European Union, and French president, as you might remember, was very active in going to talking to Putin, and he's going to sort him out, and there will not be an attack. And without them, this is the problem, I think, when we journalists, our first job is to listen and to read if we cannot listen. But I think Putin has told many times that there will be a war, that he will invade eventually. Since what, Crimea? It would be probably a good thing to listen to what he's been saying. But everyone was in denial, and then once all the forces are in position, there is nothing else but to attack. But what happened, or invade in this case? But my immediate thoughts were, there was an outburst of, obviously, solidarity. People started pouring out of Ukraine, refugees, trains, tragic, awful scenes. My immediate thought was that I've seen this repeated, obviously, in Bosnia, which was my country at the time, and many of us, but this, it didn't remind me so much of that. But what was most striking to me is that I've been reporting from the American invasion of Iraq. I've been reporting from the war in Lebanon, Syria most recently, Lebanon obviously, and then revolutions, Arab Spring revolutions as they were. But the invasion was what is the most lasting impression of me is that I realized what my job has been, because even the 2015 so-called refugee crisis, immediately these people were immigrants, mostly from the Syrian war, if you remember. But they had a connotation of danger. Danger is coming to Europe. It's dangerous. Even my colleagues here in Slovenia or at the border in Croatia or down in Macedonia, they were like, oh my God, now it's really going to be, we're in danger, it's completely different culture. So in retrospect, I realized that, oh my God, my job was to actually tell that no, these people are victims of the war. In fact, they are people. They are just like us, facing same dangers, leaving their house because they had to. But for some reason, they were not, because, and I wonder, is it because they're brown? Is it because they are of...
It's because we're racists.
Yes. Thank you. I realize where we are, and I can say that. But this was the most striking. And again, then when you started to say, it's like, how can you say that? Look at Ukrainians. They are so, they are not whatever. And then I spoke to a friend of mine in Mostar, and I said, listen, how is it possible that all these refugees who settled eventually in Switzerland, you remember, even here in Slovenia and stuff like that. And I said, and we were talking about it, I said, I don't understand, why is it, but they were Muslims. And she said, yeah, but I mean, our big luck is we're white. That's the only difference. So this was, with no offense to Ukrainians who were coming and thank God, getting shelter, people were accepting them. But this was my first thought of how racist the whole situation has been, where there were wars from Iraq, as I said, and we're going back to 2002, not to mention now when we have in all of these countries, different situation of climate refugees, but we are certainly not looking at them. I'm just talking about the beginnings of wars and the reasons. We'll get to peace because that's our thing.
Our effort will.
So this was my thought. So for these people, there was no peace, no shelter, because whenever they came over, they had a whole million other host of things to... It's interesting to know how they see peace, right? Being refugees and the war continuing in their countries.
What do you mean by that? How they see?
All of these Iraqis and Syrians who have settled in Germany and, you know, in 2015, I think their concept of peace when we talk about it, or even worse, refugees there are millions in Lebanon, in neighboring countries, Syrians, Iraqis, millions in Jordan and neighboring countries. Refugee flows that we don't even hear about in Europe until they come to our border, right? Yeah. There is peace in all these countries now, right? There is no fighting.
Since you covered many wars, I would be interested to hear, when you are following now what's going on around the world, especially in Ukraine, Sudan, Niger, but first Ukraine, do you see the timetable similar to every war that you covered, like first bombs, then talk about peace, and then what's happening? But think about that. Aida, what went through your mind when you were listening to the Western media saying that the war in Ukraine is the first on the European soil after the World War II?
I felt this little, and I felt that I'm not even part of European history. They don't even remember me. Back then, you know, I am not, by profession, I'm not a journalist. I studied German language and literature, and I thought I'm going to be a translator. But the war started, and somehow, you know, I became a journalist anyway. And I became a journalist because I really thought at the time, I was 29, I must say, I thought at the time that if the world would only know what's happening to us, it would do something, completely forgetting that I was the one who switched channels when I was watching the Gulf War I, Gulf War II, Biafra, this and that. You know, I am one of those who thought that in Africa they're constantly, you know, fighting among each other, and I'm really not interested in their problems. When it came to me, I was so insulted that the world would allow me to suffer like this. And I started because I thought if I let the world know someone will do something, nobody will do anything. If it happens here, and if it happens anywhere, nobody will do anything, just to let you know right away. It doesn't matter how white you are, nobody wants to know about anybody's problems, unless they threaten him. National interests, you know, maybe there's a war in Slovenia, but it has a potential to spill over to Austria, then Austria will care. But as long as it really doesn't have any potential to cross over the border or affect Austrian economy, they won't care. And that's human, these are people. That's human nature. That's it. Deal with it. Okay. What I expect, and Barbara was talking about this influx of first refugees, but then migrants, really migrants. Those are now, what's coming are more and more economic migrants. I understand that they're coming from another culture, and that the culture they're finding is afraid for its own identity. I understand that. But you see how hot it is today? Next year, on this day, it's going to be even hotter. And then a year after that, it's going to be even hotter and hotter and hotter. And you will be able to cope with it because you have the Alps and everything is green. There's a whole belt around the Earth that is not going to be inhabitable in 10 years. I'm not a scientist, but, you know, common sense. All these people will be climate refugees. It's not going to be just a war. These people will also try to find a spot on this planet where they can live, because it's not going to be livable where they are. It already isn't livable. And we see that in Bosnia because so many Arabs are buying properties and they just come during the summer. In the winter, they go back home, you know. They will be staying more and more in Europe. And that's going to create a conflict between their culture and our culture. We better start thinking about it now, because we have two options. To get into a conflict with 1 billion people, really? You're going to do that? Can you win? Should you win? Or we should right now start thinking about ways of how to live together in this one little green belt that is going to be left on this planet, or actually 2. And I guess we will have to make some space. And, you know, if we don't want to shoot each other over territory and just kill everybody, and then there's nobody left. So I wandered off from the subject, but this is my real fear. You know, I do see this happening.
Will Dayton Agreement help negotiate that part?
No. Dayton Agreement didn't help anything.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll talk about that. But first, Barbara, after every conflict, we say never again. It's always the same. Let's learn from the past, but we never do. You lived in the countries that where it was an armed conflict or a special operation or a war. Do you see what's happening now with Ukraine? The same, yeah, the same kind of talks from the leaders of the countries, the same path that we're going to look for war for many years until there will be sustainable or any serious talk about peace.
I see two things, and one is the same, and the second one is not the same. The one that is not the same is that Ukraine was made, so we were talking about the invasion happened, they were going to fight, and the flood of arms was coming their way, right? So this is a difference. And then everyone was so the observers, academics, politicians, ordinary people were talking about, it has to be a negotiated solution, there has to be a diplomatic solution. Sounds familiar, that is always the same. As they are sending arms in Ukraine to one side, for example. In Ukraine, this is out in the open. Nobody is even talking about peace efforts because Ukrainians want to fight, and they made it clear, and the arms industry has picked up. In other countries, especially in Bosnia and in Yugoslavia, they were saying, why couldn't we fight? Yeah, we were under the attack, and there was, why no, Yugoslavia was under the, it's a good point, right? But to us and to other natives in the Middle East, Iraq, whatever, they say, no, we'll fight for you. We will make a government for you. We will write a constitution. I'm talking about Iraq. So this is a big difference. When they overthrew Saddam Hussein, the Americans, then they came there and they say, okay, so now you find competent people. Saddam is gone. It's going to be. We have resources. We can do this now. We have an educated class. We have a whole army that was educated at West Point Academy. So we'll do it. And they were like, no. We'll bring our experts, and we'll control your oil fields and sign out the contracts, do a tender, and then we wrote a constitution. There are 2 Sunnis, 2 Shiites, the government, and they were saying, no, this is not peace, this is war. No, this is peace. It's going to be wonderful. So, what I'm trying to say, the way they are listening to Ukrainians when they are saying, give us what we need and we'll do this, we'll sort it out, in an attempt, right, at least publicly, that this is going to bring peace, because they will throw Russians out, and let's leave all the other complexities. This is what they want. Whereas in all other conflicts, it was, they got exactly what they didn't want. They didn't want a sectarian government in Iraq. But Americans were doing United States of America when everyone is representative, and people were saying, this is a recipe for more fighting, and we all know what followed their attempts. So this is the only similarity, I think it's, or maybe it's not even a similarity, it's all different, but it's because there is a colonial imperial mentality on those who say, no, 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 we come with our tanks, with our planes, we will remove a dictator who is hostile to everyone, and then we'll tell you how to live. But we'll make a package of a little agreement that will, and we'll call it peace. This is not the same at all.
Mm. I don't think it's endemic to Slovenia, but in the case of, I can't say every war, but in the case of Ukraine, definitely, there were or are basically two camps with different views as to how to end the war, how to achieve peace, how to get a better everything for everyone. So one thinks that give Ukrainians what they want, give them weapons. The other thinks that this is not the way to go. How was this evolving in case of the Yugoslav war, especially in the Bosnia, and how you, who were on the ground, felt about that speculations? Because usually it's us who are thousands or hundreds of kilometers away from the real fighting and the real suffering.
Okay, you have two different ways of how to approach this. Will you let one side win and help it win? Or will you try to reach a compromise between two ideologies that really cannot live together? And Ukraine is seems to be the example of the first. And I understand that because what they did in Bosnia is not working. The intention was good. It is a peace agreement. What it did create peace. However, if you have a part of the population that really wants to live in a democracy, but then you really do have part of a population that wants to live in a oligarchy, or I don't know, in not really democratic. There are people, they like leaders, accept it. They like to be led, you know. And they will really tolerate the lack of freedom of speech, the lack of, you know, security. They will tolerate that as long as somebody is taking care of them. This is not democratic, but people like that, you know. These two desires, you cannot make peace between. There's no compromise between those. And this is what they tried to do in Bosnia. They stopped a war without a winner. The goals of all three sides are still the same like in '92. But what is good is that the conflict has been elevated from the street, from the front line, on the academic level. So you have the same conflict being fought with different weapons. It was with guns. Now it's in the parliament, it's in the institutions. We have a safe environment. And the idea was, let's take the conflict from the street up into the institutions, where in any democratic country, conflicts are to be solved. However, it is between two different ideologies that cannot live together, a democracy and an autocracy. It's either this or that. what we now have is still the same war being fought just through political and economic means. A population that is more divided than during the war. A new generation that does not really know what it is like to live in a multi-ethnic society, how beautiful that is and how pretty that is. As a youth that still lives, that doesn't know the other youth and is afraid of it. And we have, when we had, for example, after the war, denial of crimes, say, we have a problem, you know, the Bosnian Serbs don't want to acknowledge that Srebrenica was a genocide. What do you care what they acknowledge, you know? Yeah. But now it's beyond that. It's not that the youth doesn't want to acknowledge that it was genocide. They're glorifying it. That's a new step. It's even worse than it was after the war, because they grew up in a society that is so divided. There are 3 different types of history being taught in schools. And what we had, for example, we didn't even have that after the war. What we had, for example, this July 11th, when they were commemorating the victims of the genocide, on that day, 2 young students from the Serb part of Sarajevo posted on their Instagram accounts pictures of war criminal Ratko Mladic, who actually has done this in Srebrenica, hailed him as a hero, and sent a message to their Bosniak peers with a sentence, "Nek smo vas pobili." Good we killed you. Okay, this did not happen in 96 or 7 or 8. No, nobody has done that. Now, what was the response? There was outrage in Sarajevo, but just to prove of how everybody, Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia, and Sarajevo, Zagreb, Sarajevo, and Belgrade, let me put it that way, are still entrenched in their wartime goals, tells you the aftermath of that event. 2 days or 3 days after they posted this, the Minister of Security, I think, yeah, was it? Is it the Minister of Defense invites these 2 students from Serbia, invites these 2 students to move to Belgrade and gives them a scholarship for what they have said. How do you think that this will, you know, first of all, how do you think the victims feel? How do you think that after this, any hand reached out, or anybody will reach out a hand? So for me, this type of peace agreements, like the Dayton Peace Agreement, may stop the war, remove the danger from the neighborhood, but it made it worse in Bosnia, for example, where there's simply no progress because you still have one side, 2 sides trying to break the country apart and join parts of it to neighboring countries, and one side is still daydreaming about a multicultural society. And that's going on for 30 years, and this is where the youth is growing up with. It's even, you have a situation where the oldest generation is the most progressive part of the society. And the young generation, students, are the most conservative and the most backwards part of the society. That's what peace agreements like Dayton created.
It stopped the killing, but
solved
nothing.
Solved nothing, and it's still being fought through the educational system, through economy. Just let me tell you one thing, how divided the population is. Coronavirus, I don't know how serious you take it, I do, is taking lives. Vaccines are coming to Bosnia. Republika Srpska is importing, what is it called, the Russian
The
one?
Russian, yeah, Sputnik.
Sputnik. The Federation doesn't want Sputnik. They want AstraZeneca and Pfizer. Okay. So Sarajevo is divided, that there's no wall, but we know where what is. So I live in this federal part. Whatever Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines there were in the so-called Istočno Sarajevo, people wouldn't take them. They would just refuse. They want Sputnik. The Zetra Sports Hall is right from my apartment maybe to that building. So I can see the queues from my window of people who are coming to get a shot. And every morning they put out a sign saying what shots they have that day. And I'm watching people and it says Sputnik, and people just walk over, read it, and go home. Even the vaccines are ideologically, they're probably, these vaccines are the same. How many variations can you have? It's just, but this one is Russian and Eastern. And for the price of me dying of corona, I'm not going to take Sputnik because it's ideological. Same thing on the other side. That's how divided the population is after the Dayton Peace Agreement.
After the bad peace agreements.
Yes.
Barbara, you spent for the New York Times quite a lot of time in Bosnia and ex-Yugoslavian republics recently.
Before I answer that, can I just go back to what you were saying about the Dayton Agreement? Because of course there is a precedent for exactly that kind of an agreement before Bosnian War, which is the Lebanese, the civil war in Lebanon ended. My Lebanese friends, when I was based there, they said, you started when we ended, so, And the recipe for the Dayton Agreement was very much based on the Taif Agreement that was, that entrenched the sectarian divisions from schools to suites to the chalets where they ski and who skis and who doesn't ski. And when there was of course there was the end of the fighting was stopped by the Taif Agreement. But after 15 years, everyone was tired anyway. And they had, because Lebanon is on the coast, so they had, and they are Levantine society, so they did have ceasefire agreements on Friday and Saturday, so they could go jet skiing for, I mean, the way it is comparable with, for example, the siege of Sarajevo is really, this was from this, where we are, over there on where the next building is, but it's too far, was the front line. People were watching one another with guns, neighbors from the same school in these two buildings from windows. They could see one another, 15 years. Now, when that agreement, everyone was exhausted, they wanted the fighting to stop, but what happened afterwards? It was exactly what you said, except there it was, the movement was not into, this is where I not disagree with you, but I have maybe a different point of view. When it comes to the Middle East, it's always different because we think that they just want to have a very heavy, or at least Western media tells us that they all cannot have democracy. What they can have is just a strong leader, and then it's either pro-Western or anti-Western, in which case they send more tanks and assassinate them, and they fight more. But in this case, it was disagreement, and it moved the fighting from the streets to the basement. And now we call those people who are fighting, right, terrorists. This is the difference.
Okay, that's what we don't have.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the good thing, as I said.
But the elevation or the degradation of the fighters, right, is because, and this is the same thing in Bosnia, it's not for the lack of democracy or for the lack of trying to get that, but it's because having federal institutions that are strong and representative is not a priority. is not a priority from either the Americans, and the West is behind the peace efforts or peace agreement, or Saudis, or anybody in the East. Why? Because the only priority is that you secure the roots and possibilities to do business. This is the problem. So it's not that you will have a institution that will be, strong institutions, elections and stuff like that. No, the only thing you want is fighting to stop so people can go back to their lives, as they like to say, resume lives. But up there you have your own man, it is a man always, who's going to be sorting things out for you so you can get oil, get mining rights, get
Diamonds.
oil rights, and so on. So this is the only thing I wanted to say about that I think in this sense, because, and there is another difference with Lebanese, is that you were saying that the older generation is the most progressive. That is not the case. There is always a reason for the Lebanese, and it's too long to say, but they're interesting stories. One, I will say, just in Lebanon, you have all these sectarian people have monopolies. So 20 years, or however long now it is, 30 years, there is no central electricity authority. Every sect has their own monopoly on, that's why, so this is peace. So you have, the only option you have is that you go with your guy, right? Even if you don't want, you're only Lebanese, but you are dependent on that guy who has the monopoly.
Are you both saying, based on your extensive experience, really on the ground, not academic papers, but on the ground, living with the people, living under constant bombing and so on, that better than peace agreements that don't do their jobs is to fight on?
No.
Just because one agreement that comes to mind is also the Oslo agreement and the Palestine case, and we can see how well this is going. So what do you think should happen? Because stop the killings.
I don't really have a recipe. I don't know. I don't think that anybody knows. I don't think we have actually, as humanity, even figured out how to solve this. We tried peace agreements, they don't work. It's really cruel to say, but I wish, sometimes I hear people in Bosnia say war was better.
You hear that?
Ovo se samo puškom može riješiti.
Yeah.
Samo puškom. That's what, because really all means to change anything, to make a compromise between these two ideologies have failed. And everybody just lingers on, and somehow people feel like, let's just get into an arena and fight this out. Mm-hmm. And let somebody win, and we'll see. I'm really a witness. I can't tell you. I think it was wrong to end the Bosnian war without a winner. Mm-hmm. But that would have then dragged on and on and on. And what you have is war crimes. If you let one, you cannot avoid them. Somebody is going to expel somebody. So it's okay that they stopped it. But on the intellectual level, on the institutional level, we have not ended the war. The war is still going on. So I really don't have a recipe, and I don't think that anybody has. And whoever does, I will carry his suitcases for the rest of my life. Nobody has really come up with a
peace, but at what cost?
Yeah, peace, but at what cost? But we're working on it. We're trying this. We're trying that. I wouldn't say that history and that everything is the same and it just goes into circles. We're learning a lot. It is true that after the Holocaust we said never again, and then after this we said, oh no, so really never again, and then something else happens. No, I swear to God, this is never again. And every time we say never again, and it happens again, but less and less and less. don't forget that this is, what we're living now, is the most peaceful time in human history. There is less wars than ever. You had wars and you had aggressions and entire nations disappeared and nobody cared. At least now you have this
Maybe that's
the dysfunctional United Nations, but you have something. You have international involvement. Before you didn't. There was nobody who cared about anybody's trouble. And, you know, yes, it is unfair. Yes, there are interventions in Bosnia, in Kosovo. I would call this in Ukraine also an international intervention. If you send so many fighter jets, of course you're intervening. But nobody's intervening in Tibet. You can't attack China, you know, but you can do what you can do. It's a step forward. And I don't know, maybe in 300 years we will solve this problem. But we will not solve it now. You know, I always think about, there's this alley in Bosnia, Vrelo Bosne, you know. Every time I take a walk, there's huge trees. You can't see the skies from these trees. And they were planted like 100 and something years ago. The people who planted them, they knew that they will not see the alley. We're working on it. We know in our lifetimes that we will not solve the problem. But we're going in the right direction. We're trying things out. One day, they will look back at us and say, the pioneers of peace building. And I'm happy to be part of that.
Barbara, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't want to be cynical, but I have never met anybody. Look, once our former president, the first president of Slovenia, shall I mention the name or can I be quiet about it? But there are really very interesting words, and we did not understand them at the time, but now I do. When the war started in Slovenia that you mentioned, he went out. I don't know which day it was, but it was pretty quickly after the fighting started. And he said, nič ne bo več tako, kot je bilo. Nothing will be as it used to be. And this is now for every war and every conflict that I see starting. It's the first shots. And it can be building, and they build up the conflict, right? We saw in Ukraine, it's not Instagram swiping. They build up over many years. You have to build up hate. Now it's a bit easier. On social media, you can do it faster than on the radio before. But so, and once that starts, I have not heard anybody in the fighting who said, I'm fighting for peace. Everyone was fighting for something else, and so are the Ukrainians. We from the outside, we're just they want peace. And the more they say, no, we want that chunk of the country back, and then we also want Crimea. So it becomes like, but what is peace? Like you said, that somebody wins and imposes the will, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about. And it was like that, like you said, you know, whole nations disappeared, tribes, oops, now we're in charge, this empire. So it was. So does it make it more complicated now that we have peace agreements? No, I'm still for peace agreements. But these peace agreements cannot be then transformed into countries' constitutions. It cannot be done without asking people what they want. But otherwise letting them to their own devices.
Because they are usually enforced by foreign powers who don't know the whole context, who don't understand people.
They don't want to know the whole context. They just want their interests.
Okay, I have to intervene here. There are elections, okay?
Yeah.
In Bosnia, there are elections. You can't say that a foreign power has imposed any leaders in Bosnia.
No.
What we have to face is simply that some people want autocracies and they vote for them. Look in Brazil. You know, in Brazil, they voted for an autocrat. Hitler was voted. I mean, he was not. he came into power in a very, a little bit of swindling, but essentially in a very democratic way. You know, it's not that these people are imposed. If you go to Bosnia now and you talk honestly to a lot of Serbs and say, what do you want? I want this to be Serbia.
Yes.
That's what I want. And that's the only thing I want. Then you go back, what do you want? What do you want? I want Bosnia and Herzegovina as it was before, when everybody lived in peace and harmony and other. And then you go to the, what do you want? You know what they say? For me, this is Croatia. This is Croatia for me. This is also democracy. You know, we constantly keep dismissing these desires, and we're thinking that somebody is imposing. No, people want that, and you have to make peace between them. Yes. And as long as you deny that this is really the will of these people, you're never going to solve the problem.
Well, I have to add, I agree with you completely. Everywhere in the Middle East, there have been imposed. But there were elections, and people voted, but then they said no. The Americans said, nope, not this one. And they made it in their calculations the way it was, and then they got someone else. In Lebanon, elections every 4 years, on the clock. But, people want Hezbollah. Oh, no, we don't talk to Hezbollah. Sanctions, poof. It doesn't matter. They blow up the whole port in their face. That's because, they have undemocratic...
In that regard, Sudan might be the same.
And Sudan, right now, they were on, before this started, the war started. Has anyone heard anything about what... Of course, because the refugees are still going to Egypt. Sudan was outside of media... Western media spotlight. They were doing painstaking, with a lot of pain, what you were saying about Bosnia.
They're very black.
Yes, very true. But it is an example, and we were talking amongst ourselves, those 5 people. Barbara Skubic was not there, so unfortunately she was not the 6th. But how they are really out of anyone's spotlight. They're going to make it. They're going to make an agreement with the transitional military authority. Then come the Americans. They're like, no, this is not what comes. The UAE sends tanks. It's 2 guys. I am not exaggerating. 2 men. One is supported by the US. The other is supported by the UAE. And then some other by Egypt, and there you have it. 2 men. It's unbelievable, and they're both generals and something like that, and we have war. When they were at the cusp of a democratically, not elected, but a dialogue that was going on for 2 years, and they were making extraordinary progress, that then we would say, it's wonderful because they made it. Just one other example from my neighborhood. Tunisia, the biggest example after Arab Spring, institutions, they were making progress. They were making, strong institutions, really not just elections for nothing. Parliament, women, you name it. But Tunisia had sort of this socialist order before, and it was, they had sort of the fundamentals where to base it on. Strong institutions and so. But what is the priority for the European Union? The priority is to stop migrants. So off goes the fascist Meloni or neo-fascist, I'm sorry, to Tunis, says to the president, who is like canceling the rule of law, firing judges, writing his own constitution. Off you go, here's the money that the IMF would not give him, and fighting on the streets, and also please kill as many black people who come from other parts of Africa so that they don't take boats and go to European Union. This is what I'm saying. In this sense, you are lucky in that sense. But everywhere else, at least that I've been, peace did not, it was the theater of elections was incredible and still is. And now there's not even a pretense in Iraq who is in power. They don't do elections anymore.
Okay, okay. We've been analyzing the situation in the Balkans, in Africa. What are we supposed to do? You know,
I'm not here to have a
I have a suggestion. First, we have to prepare ourselves to be more mixed than we have ever been because of the climate change. I really do believe so. They're coming, and we better come to terms with this.
Okay, we have yet to see a candidate winning on that premise.
No, he won't. But what we can do in our environments, in our families, is to start recognizing dehumanization. Every conflict, every war always is always prepared. Nothing comes out of the blue. It always starts with the dehumanization that the other side is not even a person. Because that's the only way I'm ready to kill you if you're not a person, you know. Except in my case, you have to convince me that you're not even an animal. But, you know, there are people like that. So I do, and I realized this in, I think it was 93 or 94. I went from Sarajevo, and that was under siege, to Germany because I got pneumonia. And I'm sitting there and watching the first NATO intervention in its history. They're trying to stop an attack on a little town, Gorazde, because 6 people have been, the Gorazde is under shelling, and 6 people in a hospital have been killed. So they're shelling a hospital. NATO had its first intervention in history at the same time when 800,000 people in Rwanda were slaughtered with machetes on the same day. Not 800,000 in that day, but the massacre was ongoing. That was news number 2 on Euronews. The 6 white people in Gorazde, my people, were more than the hundreds and hundreds of people that have been slaughtered that day in Rwanda. But that's news number 2. And NATO did not, you know, I mean, even consider going to Rwanda to sort out, to end the killing, to stop it. You know, just stop it. You there, and stop it. Now talk. I think that we personally, and we have to influence people around us to extend the area of our interest in human beings. We are interested in reading stories and in watching on the news and movies about people from our own culture. We don't watch movies from India. We don't watch movies from Africa. We just can't identify with them. We have to change that because these are people too, and they are coming. And we better be prepared. You know, how about in the education system, come up with something. But to recognize dehumanization and the existing dehumanization to erase it. And that's toward black people.
Barbara, what similarities or differences do you see in how the EU approaches to building peace versus the US?
The EU doesn't. It does not approach peace. The only thing it doesn't have, yeah, it's, I mean, that's a very simple answer. And it's not just how they approach peace, but the example I gave before is that the EU encourages to protect its own interest, and the migration is for at least this administration and the previous and since whatever, since the time of the European Union has been established. Migration is the biggest problem, they say. And rather than saying, okay, let's try to do, you know, we remember all of this from 2015 to have like asylum policies revamped and, you know, but look, again, I want to make an example of Tunisia. This is how the European Union treats foreign policy, interventions in other countries. They go there and they say, here is the money. This is to a man, a president of a country who has just published a decree that all migrants, all black people, with these words, in Arabic, in English was a little bit milder, are not welcome they are coming there to get jobs. He did not call them cockroaches, but it was pretty close. So hate speech from the presidential palace, and the rampage started to foreign students, to Tunisians who are black. And, excuse me, you know, to me, what you mentioned, the president giving scholarships to those two people, this is what says, this is exactly the same example. A president of a country, a European Union member, or what is she, prime minister, or whatever she is, goes there and says, here, we'll pay you, because you're doing such a good job killing people. So this is how the European Union, and let me not start let me not, you don't have enough time how irrelevant the European Union representative in any Arab country is in the lead up to a certain invasion, or coming, even the war in Sudan now, for example, the attack. There is no European Union intervention in any of these situations at all.
But you've seen a lot of the US approaches.
Yeah.
That looks like
A bulldozer is driven over anybody who wants to say anything, and then they impose their things and tells everybody to get along.
Aida, I understand no justice.
And I'm just so sorry to also add that it's whatever was made by anybody before, the US comes and pulls it out, tears it apart, and says, we're going to do it this way. And then, you know, everyone follows. But we have, you know, a lot of things have changed with the US-Iraq invasion. You have to understand, we really have to understand this, that before that, even in Bosnia and stuff, they were rescuers. The US, when they started banging the table, you know, in Dayton and in Sarajevo and in Belgrade, you know, Holbrooke and stuff, this was a completely different story because they were adamant. You know, the European Union could do nothing except steer it up even more, right? So it was the Americans who were like, something will have to happen, the fighting has to stop. That has all changed with the US invasion of Iraq. They are not the peacemakers. They are not seen anywhere as an honest broker. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Oslo peace agreements, right? Well, they were not very honest there either. But that is a monumental change how the US is perceived in any of peace agreements, peace negotiations, any kind of negotiations.
What's the view of the EU and the US in Bosnia today?
That's the view. Incapable, chaotic. We don't even know what their values are. You know, because they keep saying one thing, and you know they have in their constitution one thing, but they're not ready to fight for it, really. You know, and then I think Hungary really was an eye-opener. You know, in Bosnia you had this, ja, Evropska unija, Brussels, sve će bit. But now you see that this European Union actually doesn't really have a good system because everybody has to agree to everything. And you know, even as a very young person, if you go 2 or 3 times to the coast with your friends and you realize it's 5 of us, this is never going to end well. You know, on the one tent, you know, there was always some trouble with somebody doesn't want to do this, somebody doesn't want to do that. You know, you have to pick your friends. Same thing with the EU. You can agree to whatever you want. There's going to be one member who now has an autocrat who's going to put a veto on it. You can't do anything. And, you know, seeing the EU on its knees it's really on its knees because of Orban, because of even Italy, you know, and there's a saying now, watching what the developments, the rise of the right-wing parties in Europe, you know, Sarajevans have become very cynical, you know. You know what they say? Yeah. Mi smo mislili da smo mi 25 godina iza Evrope. Mi smo 25 godina ispred Evrope. You know, because, you know, what was happening in Bosnia is now happening in the EU. They couldn't even defend themselves. What do you expect? To defend us?
Is the China or Russia more then viewed with more sympathy, or nobody?
Really? Not in Sarajevo, but yes, there is a lot of sympathy toward among the Bosnian Serbs. As I told you, the ones that just see who has which vaccination, and then
you know who cheers for.
Yes. Nataša, I'm really sorry. I have to say that because I've just remembered there is a European Union role in the conflict, and that is in Israel-Palestine. So the Americans give weapons to Israelis and support the Israelis. They bomb. European Union always comes and rebuilds. So there is.
I've seen just recently traveling in Bosnia a lot of EU signs rebuilding and reconstructing this and that.
Yes. So yes.
It's not everything.
And I have to tell you that works. It works, you know.
But they don't know. They are not very good, the EU, on how to sell it.
No,
it doesn't work
not
in
at all.
Palestine.
PR is horrible. You know, they don't know how to sell any of their ideas. They don't know how to sell any of their projects. And they are the biggest investors into Bosnia and Herzegovina, and nobody's even noticing. Okay, they are in Sarajevo. But, you know, now, since Germany redrew 4 projects from Republika Srpska, everything changed. 2 days ago, laws that were set by the European Union as a precondition for the candidacy status and then for admission, those laws were sitting for 14 years with nobody, you know, it was impossible to pass them. The moment Germany withdrew 4 programs, 4 investments into Republika Srpska 2 days ago, all 4 laws were adopted. Para vrtiđe burgija neće. And that's yes, that works.
It does not work in Palestine, as we can see.
Okay. I understand no justice, no fairness, no peace. If people are not believing in the EU or the US or whoever, are they believing in the International Court of Justice? That it will deliver?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. They will say no. But just the fact that in Bosnia, there has not been one act of revenge on any side. You know, I don't know, this is Slovenia. You lived under Tito, just like we did. You know, the older generation, there was a saying, if you encounter an extreme injustice in your life, you know, there was always a, iću ja do Tite. You know, that was the ultimate threat. I will go to Tito with this, you know. Tito is gone, and there is no ultimate justice. What has replaced this saying, iću ja do Tite, is iću ja u Haag. Ići ću ja u Strasbourg. That's the ultimate threat in Bosnia. Ti ćeš meni u Haag. The Hague is seen actually as more effective than revenge, you know. You killed my family, and I go after the war and kill you. It's not satisfaction. Killing is not satisfaction. You know what satisfaction is? For you to admit for the whole world to see what you have done to me, to acknowledge that this was wrong, and then for you to sit in jail in front of everybody. Shame. But when I kill you, there's nothing. So, yes, The Hague, although everybody would tell you, no, the Serbs will tell you it is a political court. The Croats won't say anything. You know, the Bosniaks will say, oh, it's just, you know, For 100,000 people, these couple of clowns that are sitting there, that's not enough? No, it is. After this court, at least in the next conflict, which will come, let's never again, it's not working yet, it's too ambitious of a statement. There will be in the back of the mind of at least half of the people, wait a second, you know, I'm not quite sure if I'm going to do this. Impunity is gone. That has worked. That was a very, very successful project for me. And the other absolute invention that I think is changing the world is the ICMP. I don't know if you know what that is.
No, please tell us.
International Commission for Missing People, you know. After every war, everywhere in the world, there just people went missing. Or they're buried in some mass grave, and then there is a monument erected for all the victims of this war. That doesn't satisfy anybody. In Bosnia, what they have done, they have established this Commission for Missing People, which finds the bodies and identifies them through DNA analysis. There's no mistake who is who. And everybody is returned to the family and gets a decent burial. Why is that important? It's important for the closure of the family. You know, human rights don't end with your life. As a dead person, you still have human rights. The right to be remembered, the right for you to be laid to rest decently. And, you know, that has been done very successfully. And I think it contributed to an end of this constant spiral of violence that is always inspired by previous wars, who killed whom and how many. Where there's 700,000 people, Serbs killed in Jasenovac, or 70,000 people in Jasenovac. That discussion is over. Not Jasenovac. But in Bosnia, it is nobody will be able to manipulate after this with the numbers. And that, I think, is something that the Bosnian War has given the world. I'm an optimist, so I look at the right side, even of a war.
No, absolutely. You know, this is what I wanted to say. When we have in our languages, we have this really wonderful word that I don't know if it exists in English or not. Nemir. Nemir, right? So there is not, it's not peace, but it's... Unpeace. But it describes...
Unrest, so yeah.
It's not unrest, but it's like, because that can be, Nemir can be inside, it can be, right? So there is one good thing that happened with the Iraq invasion, and that is that, or the whatever, spread of media and stuff, but there was Al Jazeera, right? And they started to cover other conflicts and cover it from their angle, from the regional angle. And after the invasion of Iraq and already in Lebanon, what you heard was that in Lebanon in particular, you heard a lot of this, what Aida just said about The Hague. It just, the guns went silent, and then there was nothing. There was no inquiry. There was no missing persons. It was just whispered from one house to another. People went out for cigarettes and never came back. Sons, daughters, to this day. There is none of that. The importance of bringing, even if it's just a token group of people to court for peace, to stop that nemir in people that spreads around the society, just like this doubt that lingers, right? Where is my husband? I think it was that guy next to him. Yes, well, he was with those forces. This spreads like fire. But that satisfaction, to have that, and to have, not satisfaction, but to have closure, even though it was not the guy who put your house on fire and, you know, threw grandma over the balcony, right? The whole world is watching, And it's in the papers, in those, it's written somewhere. In Arabic, there's this really powerful word that also goes everywhere. It's written somewhere. Doesn't have, you know that, right? So a lot of people watching Al Jazeera, they were talking about Bosnia, and they were saying, but where is our Hague? We want the Hague. This is not peace. But who did they want to see in Hague? George Bush. We have a problem, right? So do you see what I mean? I have to like stand up for my guys. So I don't want to say that you were lucky, but like you said, I'm hopeful that this is an example. When I was talking to people who, to women in the Arab world, Muslim women who were raped, and I tell them, watch on Al Jazeera, there are women who went and testified in The Hague, Muslim women who testified, and rape is a war crime that is written in international law. Do you know how much, not pride, but how deeply this goes with people? And then they watch on Al Jazeera these women, showing their faces, testifying and stuff like that. These are not just symbolic gestures, but because they can now see media coverage of the world, not from CNN, right, coming into their living rooms, but they can see it from their point of view. Their journalists are doing this, shooting documentaries and stuff like that. But these were the first words. Where is our Hague? When they had elections and stuff. It's okay, it's fine. But people died in that bombing. People continue dying when there was fighting. Why can't we want justice? During the Arab Spring, there was the protests. We know that no justice, no peace was the slogan against the Vietnam War, and right? They had a beautiful one in Egypt when they said, if they don't let us dream, we're not going to let them sleep, right? So what does that mean? There has to be some sort of approach, and this is lacking in all these agreements that I was mentioning before, or lack of agreements, right? This is what I think that's why it's so important. And you're right, it is an example.
I think it's a huge step forward in general.
Yeah.
And I think we can put a stop to our discussion right here and right now. Aida and Barbara will be here for a while if you want to ask her anything. Slovenian, Bosnian, English. Thank you very much, and thank you to both of you for being part of the Grounded Festival.
Hvala,
Thank you.
Nataša.